It is August 1st, 2026, and somewhere between a warehouse in Ürümqi and a mountain road in Balochistan, 400 shoulder-fired missiles are waiting to move. Not 400 rifles, not 400 crates of ammunition, 400 man-portable air defense systems, the class of weapon that a single person can carry up a hillside, aim at the sky, and fire without a radar, without a data link, and without giving the aircraft above him any warning at all. The contract is worth $60 to $70 million. It was signed. The first shipment is weeks out. And it did not go through China's state arms exporter, because the man who runs China told the President of the United States, personally and directly, that China would not sell weapons to Iran. It went through a company in Hong Kong instead. The name is Zhongqing Baoshang International Investment. Write it down, because that name is the entire story. Not the missiles, not the price, the corporate structure. Because nobody builds a Hong Kong intermediary, an air bridge out of Western China, and a backup overland corridor through a third country for a transaction they are willing to defend at a press conference. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what 400 shoulder-fired missiles actually mean, you need to understand what has been building since the last week of February. On February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel opened a war against Iran with a decapitation strike. Not a warning shot, not a limited demonstration. The opening move killed Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled the Islamic Republic for 37 years, along with his senior security advisor, Ali Shamkhani, and Mohammad Pakpour, the commander-in-chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The supreme leader and the head of the guard gone in the same night, in the first hours of the first day. Iran's answer was to close the Strait of Hormuz, not restrict it, close it. The IRGC transmitted warnings over VHF radio to every vessel in the waterway, telling them that no ship was permitted to pass. Roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil trade and a fifth of global liquefied natural gas moved through that channel before that broadcast. Shipping companies suspended operations. Ships turned around in open water or stayed tied up in port. And then began 5 months of the most sustained American air campaign in a generation. Operation Epic Fury. Wave after wave, night after night. The Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group running around-the-clock operations. Iranian naval vessels struck at their moorings. An Iranian drone carrier roughly the size of a Second World War flat-top hit and left burning. Coastal defense sites, missile production, drone factories, mobile launchers, IRGC headquarters buildings, safe houses. On one night alone, CENTCOM reported a 7-hour wave of precision munitions against Iranian missile sites, naval capabilities, and coastal defense systems, launched from fighter aircraft, drones, and naval vessels operating alongside more than 20 U.S. Navy warships in theater. Iran fought back the way a state fights back. Ballistic missiles, Imad and Qadr, wave after wave of retaliatory strikes at American bases across the Gulf and at Israeli targets. 12 Americans injured at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And through all of it, Iran was fighting for altitude, trying to hold the sky over its own territory with the integrated air defense network it had spent 2 decades buying and building. That network is gone. That is the fact underneath everything else in this story. And it is the fact that makes 400 shoulder-fired missiles logical instead of desperate. A radar has to emit to see. A fixed sight has to sit still to operate. American and Israeli suppression aircraft took that architecture apart in sequence over 5 months, because emitting and sitting still is precisely what those systems are built to do, and precisely what makes them killable. So Iran quit that fight, and what it is buying now is the exact structural opposite of an integrated air defense system. Here's where things stand as of today. On July 29th, Reuters reported, citing 3 sources familiar with the deal, that Iran is expected to receive the first shipment within weeks, under a contract covering between 300 and 400 man-portable air defense systems, including Chinese-made QW-12 and FN-16 missiles, at a value of $60 to $70 million. The deal was signed with Zhongqing Baoshang International Investment, a Hong Kong company acting as intermediary between the Iranian side and the Chinese supplier. Under the plan, the parties agreed deliveries move first by air from Ürümqi, in China's Xinjiang region, then transit through Pakistan into Iran, most likely by road on that final leg. That is one of the largest known moves Tehran has made to rebuild short-range air defense since this war began. And it is not the only contract in motion. A European security source told Reuters that authorities in his country were aware of several contracts under discussion for the sale of QW series systems to Iran, including QW-12, QW-18, and QW-19 variants. A second security source in the Middle East said Iran had been trying to buy QW-12 and QW-18 missiles, but was not aware a deal had already closed. Meaning, this is not one purchase. This is a procurement campaign, and Reuters caught one thread of it. 2 Western intelligence sources and an Iranian official also told Reuters that Tehran has been exploring overland routes to move Chinese military supplies and dual-use components more quietly, specifically to reduce the risk of interference. Read that carefully. Not to reduce cost, not to reduce transit time, to reduce the risk of interference. That is not a logistics decision. That is an operational security decision made by people who assume someone is watching and someone is capable of reaching out and stopping the shipment. Now the denials, because the denials are informative, China's foreign ministry called the reporting completely groundless and repeated Beijing's position that it has consistently worked toward ending the conflict. Pakistan's Inter-Services Public Relations called speculation about Pakistani involvement absolutely concocted and false. Reuters itself noted it could not independently verify every element of the agreement. Take all of that seriously. This is single-source category reporting built on anonymous officials, and the honest framing is that this is what 3 sources familiar with the arrangement say a contract contains, not what a satellite photographed. Hold it as a serious allegation from a serious wire service, not as a confirmed shipment manifest. But hold this alongside it. CNN reported back in April, citing U.S. intelligence assessments its journalists had reviewed, that Beijing was preparing to deliver shoulder-fired systems to Iran within weeks, and that the plan involved routing deliveries through third countries specifically to obscure the weapon's origin. At the time, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington called that report untrue. Same allegation, same mechanism, same denial, 4 months apart. That brings us to the response from the Oval Office and to the single most important sentence anyone said this week. On July 29th, President Trump was asked directly about the Reuters report during a press availability in the Oval Office. His answer was that it would be surprising. He said things like, that happened, but that it would be surprising. And then he said this, that Xi told him very strongly he wouldn't partake, and that Xi knows he'd be quite disappointed. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added that Xi is coming here, he thinks, on September 24th. Read that again. Because that is not a throwaway line about a calendar. That is the President of the United States, on camera, declining to accuse China of anything, while placing a date on the record. He did not threaten sanctions. He did not announce interdiction. He did not call it a violation. He reframed a Reuters investigation into an arms transfer as a personal matter of disappointment between 2 men, one of whom is scheduled to walk into an American room in 8 weeks. That is deliberate. That is a president holding a public accusation in reserve rather than spending it, because an accusation spent today buys a news cycle and an accusation held until September buys leverage in a negotiation. A White House official put the administration's line even more plainly on the same day, that nothing any outside actor is doing to help Iran is in any way increasing their ability to target Americans. Whether that assessment survives contact with 400 launchers dispersed across Iranian terrain is the actual question this entire story turns on. So let's talk about what these weapons are, and more importantly, what they are not. The QW-12 and the FN-16 are shoulder-fired, infrared-guided surface-to-air missiles designed to engage low-flying aircraft, helicopters, and drones. That sentence contains 4 separate strategic decisions, and every one of them matters. Shoulder-fired means the launch unit is 1 person. No vehicle signature, no emplacement, no crew of 6 around a radar van. 1 man, 1 tube, 1 hillside. Infrared-guided means the seeker looks for heat, not radar returns. And that single design choice is the entire reason Iran wants this specific category of weapon, rather than something larger and more capable. A radar-guided missile has to be cued by a radar, and a radar has to emit, and the moment it emits, it exists. It appears on a threat display, it gets geolocated, and shortly afterward it gets serviced by an anti-radiation missile. An infrared seeker emits nothing. It is a passive device. It sits there and looks. Designed to engage low-flying aircraft means these things do not threaten the high-altitude strike packages that have been dismantling Iran for 5 months. They threaten what comes down low. Helicopters, search and rescue, close air support, slow movers, anything doing work that requires being near the ground. And their mobility, as analysts have noted, is the point. They can be moved and redeployed rapidly around military installations, energy infrastructure, and other sensitive sites without any of the fixed infrastructure that made Iran's previous air defense architecture targetable. That is the operational logic. 400 of these dispersed across a country the size of Iran does not create an air defense network. It creates uncertainty. It creates a condition where every low-altitude mission profile has to be planned around the possibility that a heat-seeking missile is sitting on a ridgeline with no warning tone attached to it. Which brings us to March 19th, and to the incident that this entire purchase is arguably built around. On March 19th, 2026, a U.S. Air Force F-35A Lightning II flew a combat mission over Iran, and afterward made an emergency landing at a regional American airbase. CENTCOM spokesman, Navy Captain Tim Hawkins, confirmed the emergency landing, said the aircraft landed safely and the pilot was in stable condition, and said the incident was under investigation. That is the confirmed portion. Everything past it is reporting, and it needs to be labeled as reporting. CNN, citing two sources familiar with the matter, reported the aircraft was struck by what was believed to be Iranian fire. Air and Space Forces magazine, citing people familiar with the incident, reported it was hit by ground fire and that the pilot suffered shrapnel wounds. The IRGC posted video the same day claiming it had severely damaged an F-35 and said the engagement occurred around 2:50 in the morning local time. CENTCOM has never commented on damage to the aircraft. The specific weapon has never been identified by anyone in a position to know. So be precise about what is and is not established. It is established that an F-35 made an emergency landing after a combat mission over Iran and that the pilot survived. It is reported by multiple outlets that the cause was ground fire. It is claimed by the IRGC that they did it, and it is unknown, genuinely unknown what fired. Note also that the IRGC has a track record here. Iranian-aligned groups were quick to claim responsibility for the 3 F-15E Strike Eagles lost on March 2nd and for a KC-135 incident on March 12th. Neither of those was enemy action. The F-15Es were shot down by a Kuwaiti fighter in a friendly fire incident. All 6 crew recovered. The KC-135 crashed in western Iraq, killing 6 airmen, and a second tanker was badly damaged in the same event. But here is the part that matters regardless of what actually fired that night. Air and Space Forces magazine noted something specific about Iranian capability. Iran has developed air defense systems that use passive infrared sensors rather than radar to target aircraft, an approach that previously worked in Yemen when Iranian-supported Houthi forces employed it. That is the doctrinal thread, not the individual incident. Iran has been building toward passive infrared engagement as a category for years, watched a proxy make it work, and is now buying 400 more units of it. So what does an F-35 actually bring to that fight? The aircraft was designed from its earliest requirements around penetrating integrated air defense networks built on Russian and Chinese radar architecture, which is precisely the family of systems Iran spent 20 years acquiring. Nearly every survivability decision in that airframe traces back to fighting the equipment Iran bought. The AN/AAQ-37 distributed aperture system gives the aircraft 6 infrared cameras positioned around the airframe for full spherical coverage. No blind spots, no aiming required, no pilot input needed to initiate the search. It detects launch events, tracks the resulting object, and cues the aircraft's defensive response. And it can project that picture onto the pilot's helmet-mounted display, allowing the pilot to look through the structure of his own aircraft at what is coming up at him. The AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare suite from BAE Systems provides 360-degree radar warning and emitter geolocation, built for a signal environment dense enough to saturate less capable systems. The AN/AL-70 towed decoy streams behind the aircraft as a countermeasure against radar-guided threats. Now the honest part, and it is the uncomfortable part. Almost every one of those systems is optimized against something that emits. Radar warning receivers warn about radar. Towed radio frequency decoys seduce radar-guided seekers. The entire architecture of modern fighter self-protection was built in a world where the threat announces itself before it arrives, because the physics of radar guidance require announcement. A passive infrared seeker announces nothing. There's no lock tone, there is no emitter to geolocate, there's no radio frequency signature to decoy. The first indication is the launch itself, the plume, the smoke, the thermal event on the ground, which is exactly what the distributed aperture system exists to catch, and exactly why that particular sensor is the most important piece of hardware on the aircraft in this specific fight. Iran has understood this for years. That is not speculation. That is the only rational explanation for spending $60 to $70 million on a weapon class that cannot touch a bomber at altitude and cannot contest a strike package at range. They are not buying the ability to shoot down American aircraft. They are buying the ability to make the low-altitude regime expensive. And the F-35's real advantage is not any single sensor. It is that the platform was architected to absorb new threat libraries and new detection logic as adversary tactics evolve. The aircraft that flies against a dispersed infrared threat in the fall of 2026 will not be running the same threat picture it ran in March. That is the whole point of the design. Here is the confirmed operational picture as of today. The war began February 28th. It has run 5 months. Roughly 20 U.S. Air Force aircraft have been damaged or destroyed since the campaign opened. 3 F-15E Strike Eagles lost to friendly fire on March 2nd, all crew recovered. A KC-135 down on March 12th, with 6 killed. An F-35A on the ground at a regional base on March 19th after taking damage over Iran. CENTCOM has run consecutive nightly strike waves, the 12th on July 22nd, the 13th the following night, against dozens of targets per wave. The maritime picture: at least 17 merchant ships damaged in the strait, 7 abandoned, 2 captured, 1 tugboat sunk, 12 seafarers killed or missing, 1 port worker killed in Bahrain. A U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports ran from April 13th to May 29th, then resumed in July with more than 20 warships and hundreds of aircraft in theater. And just yesterday, July 31st, the IRGC announced its forces had struck 2 oil tankers attempting to transit the strait through what it called unauthorized routes, saying the ships had been encouraged by U.S. Central Command and were under American air escort. 4 other tankers turned around. CENTCOM's position remains that Iran does not control the strait, and that American forces are there to ensure freedom of navigation. The Pentagon has stopped short of full-scale naval escort of commercial traffic, focusing instead on steering ships toward alternative routing near Oman. Now watch what happens when you put the last 7 days on a single timeline, because 3 completely different kinds of pressure landed inside a single week, and they were not coordinated by accident. Track 1 is financial. On July 29th, a drone struck the Energos Winter at the Egyptian port of Damietta, a Marshall Islands-flagged American-owned floating storage and regasification unit with 138,000 cubic meters of capacity under a 5-year charter to Egypt's state gas company, hit on the starboard side. The fire spread to the LNG carrier, Gaslog Salem, alongside it. Both crews evacuated. No injuries. Egypt's cabinet confirmed the following morning that preliminary investigation found a drone caused it, and said no party had claimed responsibility. The timing is the story. Iranian state television had named Damietta 2 days earlier as a possible target for retaliation against Ukrainian interests, following Kiev's strike on an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. And the strike came roughly a day after Eni and Total Energies committed billions to routing gas through Damietta as part of reducing European dependence on Russian energy. 1 drone, 1 commercial berth, 1 unarmed hull, and suddenly every energy insurer in the Mediterranean is repricing. Track 2 is military. That same week, the IRGC fired ballistic missiles at American forces in Jordan, striking at Al-Azraq Air Base. U.S. and Saudi forces hit Iran-linked militia sites across Iraq. The Houthis declared a maritime embargo against Saudi Arabia. The United States resumed strikes on Iran after a 5-night pause, hitting Keshem, and Iran struck Al-Azraq again, the base used to launch that strike. Track 3 is psychological, and it is the one that landed inside the United States. On July the 26th and 27th, hackers hit more than 30 community water systems across Minnesota in what state officials called a coordinated cyber attack. The FBI has reported incidents in at least 7 states. The attackers went after internet-facing programmable logic controllers, the devices that automate pressure, chemical dosing, and flow, and modified passwords to lock operators out. At least 1 municipal well and treatment plant went offline. Communities went to manual operation. In one town, the mayor described it plainly. There was power, but nothing telling the water where to go. Residents were asked to limit use for about 90 minutes until control came back. No contamination has been reported. CISA, the FBI, and the EPA have been working the response, and CISA has warned water facilities to get vulnerable industrial equipment off the public internet. Now here is where the honest version diverges sharply from the convenient version. Investigators are probing whether Iranian actors were responsible. Federal agencies had warned days earlier about Iran-affiliated actors targeting internet-facing controllers from Rockwell, Schneider Electric, and Siemens. A Minnesota IT services spokesperson noted that the timing, access methods, and targeted infrastructure share characteristics with previous coordinated attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure. Security researchers have pointed toward the ecosystem around Cyber-Avathringers, the group previously tied to the IRGC. But officials have explicitly cautioned that they have not definitively attributed it, that the assessment could change as forensics come in, and, critically, that they are also examining whether the actor deliberately made itself look Iranian in order to stir the pot in the middle of a war. And President Trump himself, at a cabinet meeting on Friday, publicly cast doubt on Iranian involvement and blamed Minnesota authorities, saying that Iran has bigger problems than worrying about Minnesota. That is the President of the United States declining to attribute an attack on American infrastructure to the country he is currently at war with. Sit with that for a second, because it tells you something real about how thin the evidence currently is, and about how much this administration is choosing to keep off the table. Which is exactly why the 3 tracks together are worse than any one of them alone. A drone with no claim of responsibility, a cyber intrusion with contested attribution, a weapons contract routed through a shell company so that no state has to own it. Every single one of these is designed to produce effect without producing a return address. That is not a coincidence. That is a doctrine. So who is actually making these decisions? Because the chain of command everyone assumes exists in Tehran has been shot to pieces, and what replaced it is not what the org chart says. Start at the top. Ali Khamenei ruled for 37 years and was killed on February 28th. Iran immediately formed a 3-member transitional council under Article 111 of its constitution. Ayatollah Alireza Arafi, President Masoud Pezeshkian and Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni AJ to hold state functions while the 88-member Assembly of Experts selected a successor. The successor is Mojtaba Khamenei, his son, the first dynastic succession in the history of the office. He was positioned for it. He effectively ran the office of the supreme leader for decades and worked closely with both the IRGC and the clerical establishment. But understand what that means institutionally. A man who spent his career as the connective tissue between his father and the Guard is now nominally commanding the Guard himself, in the middle of a war, with a legitimacy claim built on inheritance rather than on the revolutionary credentials that every previous power center in that system was built around. Now go down one level. Mohammed Pakpour commanded the IRGC for 8 months before he was killed on February 28th, and he had only taken the job because his predecessor, Hossein Salami, was killed in June of 2025. 2 IRGC commanders-in-chief killed inside 9 months. Ahmad Vahidi took the position after Pakpour. Ali Shamkhani, the senior security advisor, killed the same night. Majid Kademi, who ran the IRGC intelligence organization and the intelligence protection organization simultaneously, killed on April 6th. Both positions listed as vacant. Mohammad Kazemi, who held those same posts before him, killed in June 2025. The Aerospace Force is commanded by Majid Musavi, who inherited it after Amir Ali Hajizadeh was killed in June 2025. The ground forces are commanded by Mohammad Karami, who moved up when Pakpour moved up. Look at that structure, honestly. Nearly every senior position in the Iranian military and intelligence apparatus is currently held by someone's deputy, elevated in the middle of a war, reporting to a supreme leader who inherited the office 5 months ago, inside a system where the Assembly of Experts, the Guardian Council, the Expediency Council, and the Guard itself all have competing claims on what the actual decision loop looks like. Ali Larijani, Iran's security chief, was expected to play a pivotal role in the transition. Whether the balance of power sits with him, with the clerical bodies, or with the Guard has never been publicly resolved. On the other side of the line, CENTCOM operates under Admiral Brad Cooper, running a 5-month campaign with a carrier strike group, an amphibious ready group, over 20 warships, and continuous strike operations. A command structure that has not lost a single senior leader and has not had to improvise a succession. That asymmetry is the most underreported fact of this entire war. So here is the honest strategic assessment, stripped of both narratives. Iran is not trying to defeat American air power. That option closed in March. What Iran is doing, deliberately, coherently, and with more strategic patience than it is usually credited with, is converting itself from a state that fights wars into a system that absorbs them. Every move in the last week points the same direction. Passive weapons instead of active ones. Dispersed instead of concentrated. Disposable instead of expensive. Deniable instead of declared. A shell company instead of a state exporter. A drone with no claimant. An intrusion with contested attribution. 400 launchers spread across mountains instead of 4 batteries sitting on concrete pads. The strategic goal is not to shoot down the F-35. It is to make the sortie rate expensive, the mission planning slower, the rules of engagement more restrictive, and the political cost of a single bad night higher than the political value of continuing. It is the logic of every insurgency that has ever outlasted a superior military. Except this time, it is being run by a state against a naval blockade, on top of 25% of the world's seaborne oil. Whether it works depends almost entirely on something nobody in Washington controls. How long the American political system is willing to fund a campaign that produces destroyed launchers and open shipping lanes, but no clean ending. And here is the thing that keeps serious analysts awake, and it is not the missiles. 400 infrared-guided launchers, dispersed across a country by an organization whose intelligence directorate has been decapitated twice in 14 months, cannot be fully accounted for. That is not a criticism of Iranian competence. It is arithmetic. Weapons designed to be carried by one man, hidden by one man, and fired by one man are weapons that can also be sold by one man, lost by one man, or handed to a proxy by a mid-level commander who did not ask permission from a supreme leader he has never met. Manpads proliferate. They always have. They are the single most persistently uncontrollable weapon category in the modern arms trade, and every stockpile that has ever been dispersed into a conflict zone has leaked. Not sometimes, every time. Now hold that next to the cyber picture. Researchers tracking the CyberAv Thunger's ecosystem note that its techniques have spread to more than 60 affiliated groups, coordinated through an operations room established when this conflict began, and they warn explicitly that these proxies replicate the playbook with less discipline than the original unit, raising the risk of unintended physical consequences from operators who do not fully understand what modifying a water treatment controller actually does. Same structural failure, 2 domains. Iran has built a strategy whose core advantage is dispersal and deniability, and the inescapable cost of dispersal and deniability is that you lose the ability to turn it off. That is the irreversible threshold in this war, not a red line crossed by a president, a control problem that no negotiated settlement can uncreate. If a ceasefire were signed tomorrow morning, the 400 launchers would still be on the hillsides, the 60 affiliated hacking groups would still have the playbook, and the men holding both would still be taking orders, or not taking orders, from a command structure that has been rebuilt from deputies twice in 5 months. So come back to where this started, a warehouse in Ürümqi, a cargo flight, a Hong Kong company whose name appears in 3 sources' description of a signed contract and nowhere in any government's official record, a transit route through a country whose military calls the entire premise concocted and false, a Chinese foreign ministry calling it completely groundless, a first shipment that is, according to the reporting, weeks away, and an American president who was handed all of it in the Oval Office on camera and chose to say only that it would be surprising, while noting that the man who promised him it wouldn't happen is coming to see him on September 24th. 8 weeks. That is the window. 8 weeks between the first shipment and the handshake, and everything about how this war ends may turn on which of those 2 things happens first, and on whether anyone in Washington is willing to say out loud what 400 missing launchers would mean for every low-altitude mission flown over Iran for the next decade. Nobody has claimed the drone at Damietta. Nobody has been named for Minnesota. Nobody will sign for the missiles. That is not a gap in the intelligence. That is the design.